What's up YouTube community, Bernd here, welcome back to another video lesson. This time we will check out how to get started with slapping on the guitar. So let's get started right away. Slapping is a technique that is mostly associated with bass players, but us guitarists can also get in on the fun and work with this pretty cool and percussive technique. To get started with this pretty exciting playing style, we actually just need 3 different motions that we will combine in creative ways later on. As always, I also worked on a practical example for this lesson. This time it's a slapping riff that shows you how I use this technique for my composition in a practical context. We also learned slapping and more fingerstyle techniques in my online course 10 Steps to Modern Shredding in the chapter dedicated to playing without a pick. But for now, let's check out the practical examples I prepared for you this week. As you can hear, this is a really cool rhythmic and percussive playing style, so it's not hard to understand why so many bass players absolutely love to work with this one. When the slapping pattern that you're playing is really locking in with the drums, for example, you get some very powerful sections filled with tons of groove. I always really loved the sound of that, and that's why I wanted to develop a technique similar to that on the guitar. That's not really something that a teacher showed me or anything. I started working on it by myself and it developed into this technique that I'm showing you today. I mostly use this technique with a clean sound, so you can really hear all the details that are going on here. And as I said in the beginning, you actually only need 3 different key ingredients to get started, and we will check them out really slow once again now. First, we obviously need to work on the slap. When you perform the slap, you don't want to hurt your thumb at all. You have to find the right angle first. This is very important because when I'm slapping like that, my thumb does not hurt at all in any way. This is very important for me because I don't want you to hurt yourself at all when you're practicing this technique. I'm using this area of my thumb here to perform the slap, and it might take some time until you find the right angle to do it, the right amount of force. You don't want to hit your instrument too hard here. You still want a nice open ringing E string and not something like that, for example. You might get some ringing that you don't want. And it might start hurting a bit in this area when you overdo it, so please keep that in mind. So after you worked on the slap and got a nice motion going, you can start introducing the pop. For this one, I'm putting my finger underneath the string, my index finger right here underneath the A string, for example, and I'm pulling up until the string snaps against the fretboard, generating this pop sound. Most bass players also use their middle finger for that motion, especially for the higher strings, since it's a bit more comfortable, or a combination of both fingers. But for now, we will stick with the index finger for the practical examples. So the first exercise is pretty obvious, I guess. Once you started working individually on the slap, getting a feeling for it, and the pop, I want you to start combining those 2 motions. And I also want you to work with a metronome here, of course. Since this is a very rhythmic technique, you want to make sure to play in time to develop some groove. So you could set your metronome up to count quarter notes for you, for example, and play a slap for the first quarter note, pop for the next one, slap, pop, and so on. This might sound like a really basic exercise, but it's actually pretty hard because you start switching between those 2 motions right now. You're not just playing slaps or pops. Individually, you start switching between those 2 motions. One of the first challenges you will come across is that you only want your low E string to ring when you perform the slap. You don't want any overlapping notes. So you need to work with your left hand here to actually block the strings. That way you can still use some force with your slap, but you make sure that only the low E string is ringing and you don't get this kind of sound. As you can see, I'm also not using too much force when I'm performing the pop. The guitar strings are much lighter in comparison to bass strings, so we have a slight advantage here, I would say. I still want the notes to sound nice, to have nice articulation. That would sound a little bit too extreme. Of course, it also can sound cool to overdo it a bit, but for the most time, I want this kind of sound when I'm performing the pop. Also keep in mind that you probably want to speed it up later. So you want to make sure that you can perform your motions in a fast and economic way too. So after practicing the slap and pop for a while, alternating between them, you can start adding the third ingredient we need, a dead note we generate with our left hand. That is really nothing special. We are just touching the fretboard lightly, creating another percussive sound. One thing we really need to pay attention to though is that we are not pushing down too hard. We don't want to generate any actual notes here. We just want a nice percussive sound. So this is the final ingredient. Now we have 3 different building blocks we can mix together, and one of my favorite patterns, the one I used in the practical example, goes like this. First we are playing a slap for the open E string, then we add the dead note with our left hand, muting the strings, then we slap again, so the second slap is different, and then we can add a pop. So really slow. As you can hear, I'm not generating any individual notes or crazy chords when I'm performing the dead note. It's really just another rhythmic element I'm introducing. So as I said, this is exactly the pattern that we need to perform the riff that I wrote for this lesson. Here it is a little bit faster, so you can see what I'm talking about. It definitely needs some time to build this connection between both of your hands, because your left hand is actually more involved in all of this than it might seem. As you can see, I'm always blocking the strings, so I'm not getting this kind of sound. I'm blocking all the strings except the open E string. Then I'm using it for this kind of muted sound. And then of course for the pop. As always, the tabs and guitar profiles for the full riff are online on my Patreon page, patreon.com/Bernd. Thanks a lot to all my patrons at this point. You can download the practice backing tracks, tabs, PDF sheets, all of that stuff, and also the guitar profiles, of course, for every YouTube lesson that I published so far, so check it out if that's interesting for you. So to end this lesson, let's dissect this riff a little bit more. I will show you a couple of special things that I included in it. As I said, we pretty much only use this kind of pattern: slap, dead note, slap on the dead note, and pop. So the first thing we could do to make it a little bit more interesting is switch up the strings we are using for the pop, for example. Of course, we don't have to stick to the A string for the pop. We can also move up to the D string, for example. And string skipping is actually quite easy with slapping, because we just assign our thumb to one string and our index finger to a different string. So we don't have to worry about jumping over different strings or the picking angle with our pick. We can switch pretty easily, but as always we want to make sure that no other strings are ringing here. So the first pattern is something like that. This is the basic idea. So I'm just working with the E power chord, playing root, perfect fifth and the octave on here, and I'm alternating with the pop between B and E. I'm also going up to the G string at some point, and the pops sound really cool here, really percussive, almost like chicken picking. Another thing I like to include with my slapping riffs are extended hammer-on phrases, for example, in triplets, groups of 3. So for the slap, for example, I'm playing, and for the pop, I'm playing. So another string skipping approach. This one is a bit tricky when I perform it fast. But it sounds pretty cool, and it's still a bit easier than performing it with a pick, since I can assign my thumb to the E string and the slap with my index finger to the D string. Another small detail is a chord that I added. I was playing G on the 3rd fret of the low E string, and then the open D string and G string with my index finger like that, since I don't really have a lot of time to do some strumming or finger picking. By adding this super small chord that goes by very fast, I just wanted to add a bit of variety to my slapping riff. It's actually just a G power chord, but I'm using the open strings, so I just need one finger of my left hand and my index finger to strum the chord super quick. In the end, I was climbing up the neck with this phrase. So nothing new, but then I speed up the pattern rhythmically and I get something like that. That is pretty much the hardest part of the riff here at the end, since I still want every single motion to be audible here. It shouldn't just sound like, you know, I want every motion to be audible, not just the pops, everything else too. So it should sound something like that once again when we speed it up. So that was my super quick introduction to slapping on the guitar. Hope you enjoyed that one. Please remember to take it slow, don't hurt yourself, especially the slap can get a bit dangerous in the beginning, but you can also develop some blisters with the pop, so please take it slow and start with the individual motions before you combine them. Always work to a metronome, since this is a very rhythmic and groovy technique. You always really want to log in with the rhythm section as soon as you're playing with your friends or when you start recording your own riffs and ideas. In the end, please make sure to subscribe to become a part of this community today. It's great to see the channel growing so quickly and a positive learning environment developing on here. Leave a comment in case you have any question concerning this lesson, and a like if you enjoyed that one. That really means a lot to me. Once again, the tabs, guitar profiles and everything else you need are available on my Patreon page, patreon.com/Bernd. Thanks a lot to all my patrons at this point again, and thanks to you for watching. I will see you in the next lesson. Have a lot of fun practicing until then.